To save the rose, he became the thorns. Every blow he struck was a shield, every insult a sanctuary. Will you accept salvation from the one willing to be your greatest enemy just to keep you alive? The air in the ministry's main briefing room was thick with the scent of old parchment, damp wool, and the metallic tang of impending rain. I adjusted my robes, feeling the unfamiliar weight of the senior advocate's badge against my chest. This was it. 6 years of tireless work, of clawing my way through prejudice and red tape, had led to this promotion. My report on the restructuring of sentient rights was tucked under my arm. 34 pages of meticulous research that I believed would finally shift the foundations of our society. I looked at the head of the long mahogany table. Draco Malfoy sat there, his silhouette sharp against the grey morning light, filtering through the enchanted windows. He didn't look up. He was tracing the rim of his teacup with a long, pale finger, his expression a mask of bored indifference. When the minister gave the nod for me to begin, I stood, my pulse a steady, confident rhythm in my throat. The core of this proposal, I began, my voice clear and unwavering, is the systematic dismantling of the 1704 decree which limits the employment of individuals with varying magical statuses. If we implement the stop. The word wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a guillotine. I paused, blinking. Malfoy hadn't moved, but his eyes were now fixed on me. They were the color of a winter sky, cold, distant, and utterly devoid of the warmth I had seen in them during our brief, tentative truces in the years following the war. "Is there a problem, Director Malfoy?" I asked, my voice tightening. He reached out and took the copy of my report from the center of the table. He flipped through the pages with a slow, agonizing deliberation, the sound of the paper tearing through the silence. "Problem? No, Granger. A problem would imply there is something here worth fixing. This isn't a report. It's a sentimental diary entry disguised as policy." A few people at the table shifted uncomfortably. I felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up my neck. "I spent 4 months on those legal precedents. If you look at Section 4, I've seen Section 4, he interrupted, his tone dropping into a lethal, silky drawl. He stood up, the movement fluid and predatory. He held my report over the wastebasket at the end of the table. It's idealistic drivel. It lacks any understanding of the current political climate. It's amateurish. In fact, it's an embarrassment to this department. Then he let go. The pages fluttered down, landing in a disorganized heap among the trash. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the eyes of my peers on me, some pitying, some smug. I stared at the wastebasket, my brain struggling to process the sheer, calculated cruelty of the gesture. This wasn't just a critique. It was a public execution of my credibility. "Sit down, Granger," he said, returning to his seat without a second glance. "Since you've clearly wasted the last quarter, we will proceed with the budget allocations for the Aura office. Try to keep up if your emotions will allow it." I sat. My hands were shaking beneath the table, so I clenched them into fists until my nails bit into my palms. I didn't look at him for the rest of the meeting. I focused on the way the candlelight flickered against the dark wood, trying to breathe through the suffocating weight of my own rage. I had expected resistance, even hostility, but this was a methodical demolition. When the meeting finally adjourned, I waited until the room cleared. I wanted to scream, to hex him, to demand an explanation for the sudden, vitriolic turn he had taken since his appointment as my superior 2 weeks ago. He stayed behind, scribbling something on a piece of parchment. The scratching of his quill was the only sound in the room. "Why?" I whispered, the word escaping before I could stop it. He didn't look up. "Your work was inadequate." "That's a lie." I stepped closer, my shadow falling over his desk. "That report was airtight. You didn't even read the addendums. You did that to humiliate me, to show everyone that the golden girl can be swatted away like a fly." He finally looked at me. Up close, the shadows under his eyes were more pronounced, a bruised purple against his unnaturally pale skin. His jaw was set so tight, I thought his teeth might crack. "Do not mistake my standards for your personal grievances, Granger. If you want to play at this level, learn to produce work that isn't riddled with vulnerabilities. Now, get out. I have a department to run." "I hate you," I said, the words low and trembling with the intensity of my conviction. A flicker of something. Was it pain? No, impossible, passed through his eyes before they turned back to ice. "The feeling is entirely mutual. Close the door on your way out." I left, my heels clicking sharply against the stone floor of the corridor. The ministry felt colder than usual. I didn't head to my office. I headed to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face and hide the fact that my eyes were stinging. I told myself it was the betrayal. We had been, not friends, but something close to it during the reconstruction of the library. We had shared tea in silence. We had discussed charms. I thought he had changed. But as the day went on, the weight of his cruelty began to manifest in strange ways. I returned to my desk to find my afternoon schedule cleared. My assistant, a nervous young wizard named Tibbets, informed me that Director Malfoy had personally reassigned the Greyback Remnant file, a dangerous, politically charged case I had been dying to lead, to a senior clerk in another office. He said you weren't ready for the physical risks of field interviews, Tibbets squeaked, looking at his feet. I slammed my hand onto the desk. He was stripping me of everything. My voice, my projects, my standing. He was burying me in the shadows of the ministry while he took the stage. That evening, the rain finally broke. I stood at the window of my small office, watching the droplets race down the glass. The castle, or the ministry's imitation of it, felt like a cage. I stayed late, fueled by a mixture of spite and the need to prove him wrong. I began to rewrite the report from memory, refining every sentence, sharpening every argument until they were blades. Around midnight, the floorboards in the hall creaked. I froze. The footsteps were slow, measured. They stopped outside my door. I watched the shadow beneath the doorframe. Whoever was there didn't knock. They just stood there, a silent sentinel in the dark. My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached for my wand, but something stayed my hand. There was a familiar scent drifting through the gap, the smell of sandalwood and expensive ink. Malfoy. He didn't enter. He stayed for perhaps a minute, the silence between us heavy and suffocating, vibrating with things unsaid. I could almost feel his presence through the wood, a cold, sharp energy that made the hair on my arms stand up. Then the shadow moved, and the footsteps receded. I opened the door and looked out into the hallway. It was empty, lit only by the flickering, dim green of the flue lamps. I returned to my desk, my mind racing. Why was he there? To gloat? To see if I was crying? I sat back down and reached for a fresh piece of parchment, but my hand brushed against a folder I hadn't noticed before. It was a file I had submitted a week ago, a routine audit of the Wizengamot's travel expenses. It was a boring, safe task. I opened it and frowned. My original notes were there, but there were tiny, microscopic annotations in the margins, not in my handwriting. Paragraph 3. Rephrase. This wording implies a direct accusation against Not Senior. You are not ready for that fight. Paragraph 7. Remove the reference to the 1996 seizure. It draws too much attention to the Oversight Committee. The corrections were cold and clinical, but they were protective. If I had submitted the original version, I would have made enemies of 3 of the most powerful families in Britain before my first month was up. I stared at the ink. It was his. I looked at the wastebasket where he had thrown my report. He had destroyed it in front of the minister. He had called me incompetent in front of the world. He was taking my cases away and treating me like a child. But here, in the dark, he was editing my mistakes so I wouldn't get burned. I felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the draft in the room. Who was Draco Malfoy really protecting? His own reputation? Or was there something lurking in the corridors of power that I was too blind to see? I looked at the door. I wanted to run after him, to grab him by those expensive robes and shake the truth out of him. But I knew him. He would only sneer. He would only push me further away. I picked up my quill and began to write. But for the first time, my certainty was gone. The war wasn't over. It had just moved into the shadows, and for some reason, the man I hated most was standing between me and the dark. The following week was a slow descent into a refined kind of purgatory. Draco didn't just ignore me. He dismantled my existence within the ministry with the precision of a master clockmaker taking apart a faulty timepiece. Every morning, I arrived at my desk to find a new mountain of menial paperwork, filing old permits, cross-referencing broomstick safety regulations from the 1970s, tasks that a first-year intern would find insulting. Every time I tried to corner him, he was a ghost, or worse, he was a wall. On Tuesday, I intercepted him in the narrow corridor leading to the departmental archives. The walls were lined with towering shelves of silent scrolls, and the air was cool and still. He was walking with that brisk, aristocratic stride, his black robes billowing slightly behind him. "Malfoy," I called out, my voice echoing off the stone. He didn't stop. "I don't have time for your grievances, Granger. I have a briefing with the minister." I hurried to catch up, my breath hitching in my chest. "You took the werewolf registry case away from me. That was my project. I've been building trust with those packs for 2 years." He stopped so abruptly I nearly collided with his back. He turned, and for a moment, the sheer physical presence of him caught the words in my throat. He was taller than I remembered, his frame lean and tense under the impeccable tailoring of his suit. His face was a study in sharp angles and pale, translucent skin. "Trust," he spat, the word dripping with venom. "You don't build trust with monsters, Granger. You build dossiers. You are becoming familiar. It's unprofessional. I've handed the case to Hilliard. He understands the necessity of distance." "Hilliard is a bigot," I shouted. my temper finally snapping. "He'll undo everything. You're doing this on purpose. You're trying to provoke me into quitting, aren't you? Is this your revenge for the trials? For your family's disgrace?" The silence that followed was heavy, vibrating with the force of my accusation. Draco's eyes narrowed until they were mere slits of silver. He stepped toward me, invading my personal space until I was forced to lean back against a shelf of heavy ledgers. He leaned in, his hand bracing against the wood next to my head. I could smell him. Expensive soap, cedarwood, and a faint, bitter undertone of burnt sage. "My family's disgrace," he whispered, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. "You think this is about pride? You think I care enough about your petty moral crusades to risk my position for revenge?" "Then why?" I whispered back, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Why are you destroying me?" He looked down at me, and for a fleeting second the mask slipped. I saw a flicker of raw, unadulterated exhaustion. His gaze dropped to my mouth, and then snapped back to my eyes, turning back to stone instantly. "Because you are loud," he said coldly. "You are loud, you are visible, and you are far too convinced of your own invincibility. In this building, that makes you a target. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual work to do." He pushed away and left me standing there, trembling and confused. A target? What did that even mean? I was a war hero. I was the brightest witch of my age. I was supposed to be the future of the ministry. I spent the afternoon in a fog of resentment, but Malfoy's words haunted me. I began to look at my office differently. I noticed the way certain officials from the administrative services would linger near my door. I noticed how my outgoing mail was being diverted to security review more often than anyone else's. That night, a thunderstorm rolled over London. The enchanted ceiling of the ministry atrium was a chaotic swirl of purple clouds and jagged lightning. I stayed late again, but this time I wasn't working on reports. I was digging. I used my clearance to access the restricted personnel files. My hands shook as I scrolled through the logs. I was looking for the greyback remnant file he had taken from me. I found the entry, but my blood ran cold when I saw the status. The file wasn't with Hilliard. It wasn't with anyone. The logs showed that Draco Malfoy had personally checked it out under a Class S secrecy mandate. But he had told the minister and me that it was being handled by the junior staff. He was lying. He was burying the case entirely. I felt a surge of righteous indignation. He wasn't just stalling my career, he was obstructing justice. I marched toward his office, my boots echoing like drum beats in the empty corridors. The ministry was a graveyard at this hour, lit only by the occasional glowing orb of a flickering torch. I didn't knock. I threw the door open. "I know what you're doing," I began, the words tumbling out as I crossed the threshold. "You lied about the Greyback case. You're suppressing—" I stopped. The office was dark, save for a single candle burning on his desk. Draco wasn't sitting in his chair. He was slumped on the small velvet sofa in the corner, his head tilted back against the wall, his eyes closed. His collar was undone, his silk tie discarded on the floor. He looked broken. On the table in front of him lay my original report, the one he had thrown in the trash. It was covered in red ink. But as I stepped closer, I realized it wasn't just red ink. He had rewritten the entire legislative framework in the margins. He had turned my idealistic prose into a legal fortress, reinforcing every weak point I had left exposed. He hadn't destroyed it. He had perfected it. "Granger," he said, his voice raspy. He didn't open his eyes. "You really have no sense of self-preservation, do you?" "What is this?" I asked, gesturing to the papers. My anger was being rapidly replaced by a disorienting sense of vertigo. "You told me it was drivel." He finally opened his eyes. They were bloodshot, his pupils blown wide in the dim light. He sat up slowly, rubbing his face with his hands. "It was drivel, because if the committee had seen it in that state, they would have used it to tie you to the extremist factions of the underground. They're looking for a reason to purge the new blood influence, Hermione. Do you really not see the shadow over this place?" It was the first time he had used my name in years. It felt like a physical touch. "You're protecting me," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "The public humiliation, the menial tasks. You're making me look like a failure, so they stop seeing me as a threat." Draco stood up, his movements heavy. He walked toward me, the candlelight casting long, distorted shadows across his face. "I am making you invisible," he corrected, his voice tight, "because the alternative is your ruin. They are waiting for you to make one mistake, one slip of the tongue that sounds like sedition, and they will tear you apart." "And what about you?" I asked, stepping toward him. "You're the one taking the cases. You're the one holding the files they want gone. If they find out you're stalling—" "I'm a Malfoy," he said, a ghost of a bitter smile playing on his lips. "I'm already ruined in their eyes. I'm just playing the part they expect of me. The cold, efficient pureblood who knows how to keep the undesirables in their place." He was standing inches from me now. The tension between us was no longer just anger. It was something far more volatile. I could see the pulse jumping in his neck. I saw the way his fingers twitched, as if he wanted to reach out but was holding himself back by sheer force of will. "You've been absorbing the blows meant for me," I said, my voice barely audible. "Why? After everything, why would you do that for me?" Draco's expression shifted, the ice finally cracking to reveal a bottomless well of guilt and something that looked terrifyingly like devotion. "Because I've spent my whole life watching things I value be destroyed by the people I was supposed to trust. I won't let it happen again. Not to you." He reached out then, his hand trembling as he tucked a stray lock of hair behind my ear. His skin was cold, but the touch felt like fire. My breath hitched, and for a long moment, the world outside this room, the ministry, the rain, the looming threats, ceased to exist. There was only the smell of sandalwood and the suffocating weight of his unspoken sacrifice. Then, just as quickly, he pulled his hand away, his face hardening back into a mask of indifference. "Now," he said, his voice regaining its sharp edge, "go home, and tomorrow you will come in and complain loudly to Tibbets about how I forced you to archive the marriage licenses of 1850. Do you understand? Draco, go, Hermione." I turned and walked out, but as the door clicked shut behind me, I didn't feel like the victim anymore. I felt like the only person in the world who knew the truth about the villain, and that secret was more dangerous than any report I had ever written. The following morning, the sun was deceptively bright, casting long, sharp rays across the black marble floors of the ministry. I did exactly as Draco commanded. I stood by the communal tea trolley and complained, my voice pitched just high enough to be overheard, about the utterly archaic and soul-crushing task of filing marriage licenses from the 19th century. I saw the satisfied smirks on the faces of several senior officials, men who had been at the ministry since the days of umbrage. They liked seeing me diminished. They liked seeing the brightest witch of her age reduced to a filing clerk. But as I sat at my desk, surrounded by dusty, yellowing scrolls of matrimonial records, my mind was not on the archives. It was on the way Draco's hand had felt against my temple. The memory of his touch was a persistent distraction, a warm coal glowing in the center of my chest. Every hour I felt the shift in the atmosphere. Before, I had seen Draco's presence as a dark cloud over my career. Now, I saw it as a shield. I began to notice the subtle movements he made during the midday briefing. He sat at the head of the table, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the room like a hawk. When Travers, a man with a penchant for traditionalist rhetoric, began to question the whereabouts of the greyback files, Draco didn't blink. "The files are under my personal review, Travers," Draco said, his voice as smooth and cold as polished stone. "The protocols were handled incorrectly by the previous administration. I am sanitizing the data before it's released to the General Committee. Unless, of course, you're suggesting that my oversight is insufficient." The challenge was blatant. It was a dare. Travers backed down, muttering something about efficiency, but the look he exchanged with his neighbor was predatory. They were circling him. Draco was intentionally drawing their focus, making himself the bottleneck for every piece of information they wanted to exploit. He was becoming the villain they needed him to be, just to keep their eyes off me. I felt a sickening pull in my gut, an emotional seesaw that left me breathless. I hated that he was doing this without my consent, treating me like someone who needed to be tucked away for her own safety. Yet, I was overwhelmed by the sheer weight of his silence. He was suffering for me, and he wouldn't even let me thank him. By late afternoon, the tension in the office reached a breaking point. I was summoned to his office via a cold, formal memo. "Granger, my office. Now. Bring the 1852 registries." When I entered, the door slammed shut behind me with a violent click of magic. Draco was standing by the window, his back to me. The sky outside had turned a bruised purple, the preamble to another storm. "You're being too quiet," he said, without turning around. "I did what you said," I replied, crossing the room. I dropped the heavy scrolls onto his desk. "I complained. I looked miserable. What more do you want?" "I want you to be smarter," he snapped, turning to face me. His eyes were wild, the pupils dilated. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 48 hours. "You were seen in the restricted archives last night. Do you think I'm the only one who monitors those logs? If I hadn't gone in and scrubbed your signature from the entry, you'd be sitting in an interrogation room right now." I recoiled as if he'd slapped me. "I was trying to find out what you were hiding. I didn't know." "You didn't know because you still think this is a school project, Hermione. You think if you follow the rules and work hard enough, the world will be fair. It isn't. The people in this building don't want reform. They want the status quo, and they want someone to blame for the war. You're the perfect candidate. A war hero who's lost her way and turned into a radical." He took a step toward me, his presence suffocating. "Every time I push you down, I'm giving you another day of life. Every time I insult you, I'm building your alibi. If you're seen as my victim, they won't suspect you're my accomplice." "I never asked to be your accomplice," I shouted, my voice cracking. "I never asked you to be my martyr, Draco. Why won't you let me stand with you? Why does it have to be this cruel charade?" The air between us charged with static. I could feel the magic vibrating in the room, reacting to our combined distress. I reached out, grabbing the lapels of his robes, forcing him to look at me. "Stop treating me like a child. Stop being so bloody noble in the most twisted way possible." He grabbed my wrists, his grip tight, not to hurt me, but to steady himself. His breath hitched. "It's not noble. It's selfish. If you break, if they take you, I have nothing left. Do you understand? I am a man with no country, no family name, and no future. You are everything I failed to be." The honesty of it was devastating. The approach was so sudden, so raw, that it made my head spin. For a heartbeat, the mask of the cold director vanished completely, leaving only the boy who had made all the wrong choices and was now trying to atone for them in the only way he knew how, through shadows and lies. "You have me," I whispered, stepping into his space until our chests were almost touching. "You don't have to do this alone." For a moment, I thought he would break. His eyes softened, his grip on my wrists relaxed, and he began to lean in, his forehead almost resting against mine. The scent of him, ink and cold air, swirled around me, and I felt a desperate, irrational urge to pull him closer. Then the repulsion hit. A loud knock sounded at the door. Draco practically threw me away from him. In a split second, the warmth vanished, replaced by a terrifying glacial distance. He straightened his robes, smoothed his hair, and sat down at his desk, his face becoming a mask of pure, unadulterated arrogance. "Enter," he barked. It was Hilliard. He looked between us, a nasty smirk on his face. "Am I interrupting something, Director?" Granger looks flushed. "She's incompetent," Draco said, his voice devoid of any emotion. He didn't even look at me. "She brought me the 1852 registries when I specifically asked for the 1854. Her inability to follow simple instructions is becoming a liability to this department." I stood there, my skin still tingling from where he had touched me, listening to him dismantle my dignity once again. The cold was sharper this time, because I knew the warmth that lay beneath it. "My apologies, Director," I said, my voice thick with suppressed emotion. I didn't look at Hilliard. I kept my eyes on Draco, searching for a flicker of the man I had just seen. There was nothing, just a stranger in a black suit. "I'll go and find the correct files immediately." "See that you do," Draco snapped, "and don't come back until you've learned how to read a date." I turned and walked out, Hilliard's quiet laughter following me into the hall. I made it to the end of the corridor before I had to stop and lean against the cold stone wall, my heart racing. The seesaw was exhausting. He was my protector and my tormentor. He was the only person who saw the truth and the only person who made me feel like a lie. I looked down at my wrists. They were still red from his grip. He was willing to be hated, I realized. He was willing to have me hate him as long as it kept the wolves at bay. But he was forgetting one thing. I was a Gryffindor. I didn't want to be hidden. I wanted to fight. As I headed back to the archives, I realized the pattern was changing. The small annotations in my files, the secret warnings, the public insults. They were all leading to a tipping point. Draco was absorbing the poison meant for me, but he was reaching his limit. I could see it in the way his hands shook when he thought I wasn't looking. I reached the archive doors and paused. I wasn't going to look for the 1854 registries. I was going to find out what Travers and Hilliard were planning. If Draco was going to play the villain to save me, then I would have to play the spy to save him. The rain began to lash against the enchanted windows, the sound a rhythmic drumming that matched the pulsing of my blood. The tension between us was a wire stretched to its breaking point, and I knew that soon, very soon, it would snap. And when it did, I wasn't sure if either of us would survive the fallout. I pushed open the heavy doors, the smell of old paper and secrets rushing out to meet me. The game had changed. The silence was over. The archives at midnight were not just a room. They were a labyrinth of forgotten sins. The flickering light of my lumos cast long skeletal shadows against the floor as I moved deeper into the restricted rows. My heart was a frantic drum behind my ribs. I wasn't looking for marriage licenses anymore. I was looking for the paper trail of the men who were currently smiling at Draco Malfoy while sharpening their knives for his back. I found the ledger I needed, tucked behind a series of dull tax audits, a hidden register of discretionary spending linked to Hilliard and Travers. As I flipped through the pages, my breath hitched. It wasn't just corruption, it was a conspiracy. They were funneling ministry funds into a private security force, a group of purifiers meant to enforce the old laws once the current administration was pressured out. And they were using the Greyback case as their catalyst. The plan was simple and lethal. They would wait for a high-profile failure in the department, blame the liberal negligence of the new blood, and use their private force to restore order. Draco was holding the Greyback files because he knew. He was sitting on the evidence, refusing to let them trigger the trap, but by doing so, he was making himself the primary target for their elimination. You really don't know when to stop, do you, Granger? The voice came from the darkness behind me. I spun around, my wand raised. Draco was leaning against a stone pillar, his face half submerged in shadow. He looked ghastly, his skin almost translucent in the magical light, his eyes sunken. He didn't have his wand out. He just looked tired, an ancient kind of exhaustion that seemed to seep from his very bones. "They're going to kill you," I whispered, the ledger trembling in my hand. "Draco, they're not just trying to fire you. They're building a shadow army, and they're going to frame you for the embezzlement to fund it." He didn't look surprised. He stepped into the light, his movements slow and deliberate. "I know. Why do you think I've been making such a spectacle of your incompetence? If I'm the one who falls, I need you to be the person who was wronged by me. I need you to be the victim, so that when the purge begins, you're the one they leave alone. You're the one who survives to tell the truth." "I don't want to survive if it means you're destroyed for something you didn't do." I marched up to him, the distance between us vanishing in an instant. The air was thick with the scent of old dust and the sharp ozone tang of his magic. "Why must it always be a sacrifice with you? Why can't we fight this together?" "Because you're a symbol, Hermione," he roared, finally losing his composure. He grabbed my shoulders, his fingers digging into the fabric of my robes. His face was inches from mine, and for the first time, I saw the raw, unshielded fear in his eyes. You are the victory we fought for. If they break you, if they turn you into a cautionary tale of a fallen hero, then the war was for nothing. I am already a cautionary tale. I am the boy who made the wrong mark. I am expendable. You are not. I am not a symbol, I cried, my voice cracking in the hollow space of the archives. I'm a woman, and I'm watching the man who is protecting me, walk into a fire. Do you think I can just sit at my desk and file papers while they take you to Azkaban? Or worse? The silence that followed was suffocating. His hands on my shoulders shifted, his grip softening, his thumbs tracing the line of my collarbone through the heavy cloth. The emotional seesaw swung violently toward a terrifying magnetic pull. The anger was still there, but it was being drowned out by a desperate, jagged need for connection in the face of certain ruin. He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if he were memorizing the map of my face. His gaze was a physical weight, heavy, mournful, and intensely private. You were always so loud, he whispered, his voice a ghost of its former arrogance. Even at school, your hand always up, your voice always the first to challenge. I used to hate it. I used to hate how much you believed in the world. And now? I asked, my breath shallow. Now, it's the only thing that makes me believe there's a reason to wake up tomorrow. He let go of my shoulders, but he didn't move away. The tension between us was a living thing, a wire pulled so taut it was humming. I saw his gaze drop to my lips, and for a second, the can't stand it gave way entirely to the can't help but think. We were on the precipice of something that would change everything, a betrayal of the roles we had played for years. Then, the cold returned. "Give me the ledger, Hermione," he said, his voice regaining its flat, clinical tone. "No, I'm taking this to the minister. The minister is being watched. If you take that to him now, Hilliard's people will intercept you before you reach the elevator. You'll disappear on a late-night shift, and no one will ask questions because I've already established that you're unstable and prone to erratic behavior." He held out his hand. "Give it to me. I'll make sure it reaches the right hands through the Malfoy channels. They won't touch me yet. They still need me to sign off on the budget." "You're lying," I said, my heart sinking. "You're going to use it to bargain for your own safety, or you're going to bury it to protect me further." "Trust me," he said. It was a plea, disguised as a command. "How can I trust you when you spend every day insulting me?" I stepped back, clutching the book to my chest. "You've created a world where I can't tell what's real anymore. Every look you give me is a lie. Every word is a script. I don't even know who you are when the doors are closed." "You know exactly who I am," he snapped, his eyes flashing with a brief, sharp pain. "You just don't like the answer because it doesn't fit into your neat little boxes of good and evil. I am doing what is necessary. Now, the book. Now." I looked at him, the pale, sharp-featured man who had become my tormentor and my guardian. The doubt was a poison. Was he playing me? Was this entire protection narrative just another layer of a Malfoy scheme? Or was I looking at a man who was drowning and trying to push me toward the shore? "I'll give it to you on one condition," I said, my voice trembling. "I don't negotiate with subordinates." "You do with me. Come to my flat tomorrow night. No masks, no ministry. Tell me the truth about the Greyback case, the real truth, and I'll give you the ledger." Draco froze. The thought of being in my space, outside the safety of his office and his role, seemed to terrify him more than the prospect of Azkaban. He looked at the ledger, then at me. The internal conflict was written in the way his jaw tightened. "Fine," he bit out. "Tomorrow at 8. But if you're followed, Granger, I won't hesitate to leave you behind." "You've never left me behind yet," I retorted, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. He turned without another word and vanished into the darkness of the stacks. I was left alone in the cold, the smell of his sandalwood lingering in the air like a promise or a threat. I clutched the ledger to my chest, realizing that I had just invited the wolf into my home. As I walked out of the ministry, the rain began to pour in earnest, washing over the black pavement. I felt like a different person than the woman who had walked in that morning. The lines between us were blurring, and the slow burn of our shared history was finally starting to catch fire. I didn't know if I was saving him or walking into a trap, but for the first time in years, I felt truly, dangerously alive. I reached my flat, the silence of the rooms feeling heavy and expectant. Tomorrow, the masks would come off. Tomorrow, I would find out if the man who destroyed my reports was the same man who had rewritten them in the dark. And as I looked at my reflection in the dark window, I saw the vulnerability he had mentioned. He was right. I was a target. But he was wrong about one thing. I wasn't going to be the only one who survived. The game was no longer about professional standing. It was about survival. And as the lightning flashed outside, illuminating the empty streets of London, I knew that the cold was about to break. The clock on my mantelpiece ticked with agonizing precision, each second a hammer blow against the silence of my flat. I had spent the last 2 hours pacing the small living room, moving stacks of books I'd already read and straightening cushions that didn't need adjusting. The air in the flat felt thin, charged with the same restless energy that had been brewing in the ministry's corridors for weeks. Outside, the London rain had turned into a steady, rhythmic thrumming against the glass, a sound that usually soothed me, but tonight it only felt like a countdown. At exactly 8 o'clock, the wards at my door hummed, a low, vibrating frequency that signaled someone was standing in the hall. My breath hitched. I took a moment to smooth my sweater, a simple, soft wool that felt far too domestic for the confrontation I was about to have. I opened the door. Draco stood there, framed by the dim light of the hallway. He wasn't wearing his ministry robes. Instead, he wore a dark, high-collared coat and black trousers, looking less like a government official and more like a shadow that had taken human form. He looked exhausted. The sharp lines of his face seemed deeper, his eyes more haunted. He didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped inside, his presence immediately shrinking the room. "You weren't followed," he said, more of a statement than a question. He scanned my living room with a clinical gaze, his lip curling slightly at the sight of my overflowing bookshelves and the muggled television in the corner. I took 3 different apparition points and walked the last mile in the rain, I replied, closing the door and locking it with a firm flick of my wand. "I'm not a complete amateur, Draco." He turned to face me, shedding his damp coat to reveal a charcoal shirt underneath. He looked strangely vulnerable without the armor of his status. "In this game, Granger, Everyone is an amateur until they're dead. Where is the ledger? I said we would talk first. You promised the truth. I walked toward the small kitchen table where a bottle of red wine and 2 glasses sat. I didn't pour them yet. I needed my wits sharp. Sit down, please. He remained standing, his hands clenched at his sides. The truth is a luxury we don't have time for. Hilliard is moving faster than I anticipated. He's already started leaking rumors to the Daily Prophet about security breaches in our department. He's setting the stage for an internal audit, one he will control. Then tell me why you took the Greyback case, I pressed, stepping closer. Why bury it? If you had let me investigate, we could have exposed the corruption months ago. Draco laughed, a harsh, jagged sound that had no humor in it. He finally moved toward the table, but didn't sit. He leaned his weight onto his hands, looming over the wood. If I had let you investigate, you would have found the names of half the Wizengamot on the payroll of the Purifier Front. And they would have killed you before you could even draft the warrant. I didn't bury the case to protect the criminals, Hermione. I buried it because the case was a trap designed to find out who was disloyal to the old ways. You were the first person they wanted to test. The emotional seesaw tipped sharply. I felt a wave of cold realization wash over me. The cruelty of the past weeks wasn't just about my career. It was about his survival as my protector. You've been playing both sides, I whispered. You've been letting them think you're on their side by suppressing the evidence while secretly trying to dismantle it. I haven't been dismantling anything, he snapped, his voice dropping into that dangerous low register. I've been stalling. There is no winning here. There is only staying alive long enough for the wind to change. But you keep trying to set the world on fire with your little reports and your righteous indignation. You're making it impossible for me to keep the mask on. He looked at me then, and the can't help but think intensity returned. The silence between us stretched, thick with the weight of things we hadn't said since the war ended. We were no longer director and subordinate. We were 2 people who had been shaped by the same fire, standing on opposite sides of a flickering candle. Why do you care? I asked, my voice trembling. After all the years of silence, why go to these lengths for me? You could have stayed in their good graces. You could have been the golden boy of the new order. Draco stepped around the table, his movements fluid and predatory. He didn't stop until he was mere inches away. I could feel the heat radiating from him, a stark contrast to the cold rain he'd just come from. Because I'm tired of being a coward, he said, his voice a ragged whisper. And because you are the only thing in this rotting ministry that isn't a lie. Watching you, seeing you march into those meetings with your head held high, believing that you can actually change things. It's the only part of my day that doesn't feel like a performance. He reached out, his fingers brushing the skin of my forearm. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it sent a jolt of electricity through me that made my breath catch. The approach was so visceral, it felt like a physical blow. I told you, he continued, his gaze locked on mine. I'm a man with no future, but you have one, and I will burn every bridge I have left to make sure you get to walk across it. I don't want a future if it's built on your bones, I said, my voice rising. I reached up, my hand covering his where it rested on my arm. His skin was pale and cool, but his pulse was racing under my palm. Don't you see? You're doing exactly what they want. You're isolating yourself. You're letting yourself become the villain, so they have someone to execute when things go wrong. It's a role I know how to play, he said, his face hardening. He tried to pull his hand away, the repulsion beginning to set in. Now, give me the ledger. I need to get back before my absence is noted. No. I gripped his hand tighter, refusing to let him retreat into the shadows. Look at me, Draco. Stop being the director. Stop being a Malfoy. Just for 1 minute. Look at me. He froze. His grey eyes searched mine, shifting through a kaleidoscope of emotions. Guilt, fear, and a raw, aching vulnerability that he had spent years trying to kill. The warmth was overwhelming now, a suffocating heat that made the room feel too small. You think you're so strong, he whispered, his other hand coming up to cup my jaw. His thumb traced the line of my lower lip, a slow, deliberate movement that made my knees weak. But you have no idea how much danger you're in. You have no idea what I've had to do to keep them from your door. Then tell me, I pleaded, leaning into his touch. Trust me. Let me help you. I can't, he groaned, his forehead dropping to rest against mine. If I trust you, I lose my edge. If I let you in, I become weak. And if I'm weak, they'll kill us both. The tension was a physical cord between us, vibrating with the force of our unspoken desires. I could feel his breath on my lips, warm, smelling of mint and the faint bitterness of the wine I hadn't even poured yet. This was the tension I had felt in every meeting, every sharp word, every public humiliation. It wasn't hate. It was a distorted, desperate form of love that had been forced to grow in the dark. I'm already in, I whispered, my hand sliding up his chest to rest over his heart. It was thudding against his ribs like a trapped beast. You can't push me out now. Not after this. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his expression a mask of agony. You're going to regret this, Hermione, when the truth comes out. When you see what I've really been doing, you're going to hate me even more than you did at school. I don't think that's possible, I said, a small, sad smile touching my lips. For a moment, the world stood still. The rain outside, the ministry, the shadow of Hilliard, everything vanished. There was only the sound of our breathing and the flickering light of the fireplace casting golden hues over his pale skin. Then, the cold returned with a vengeance. Draco's eyes snapped toward the window. He stiffened, his hand dropping from my face. "Wards!" he hissed. "Someone just tripped the perimeter." "What? No, that's impossible. Quiet." He reached for his wand, his body shielding mine instinctively. He didn't look like a man who was afraid. He looked like a man who had been expecting this final betrayal. They followed you. Or they followed me. It doesn't matter. He turned to me, his face a cold, hard mask once again. The ledger. Give it to me now, or everything we've done tonight is for nothing. I looked at him, the trust versus betrayal conflict tearing at my soul. Was this the play? Had he come here just to get the book before his friends arrived? Or was he really my only hope? The front door of my flat shuddered under a massive concussive spell. The wood didn't break, but the vibrations knocked several books off my shelves. "Hermione!" Draco grabbed my shoulders, shaking me slightly. "The ledger! Now!" I reached into my bag on the table and pulled out the book. I handed it to him, my heart breaking as I saw the flicker of something, relief, triumph, cross his face. He tucked it into his coat and turned toward the door, his wand held high. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his voice devoid of the tenderness that had been there only moments ago. And don't say a word. To them, you are just a subordinate I've been disciplining. Do you hear me? You are nothing to me. The words cut deeper than any spell. I stood in the middle of my ruined living room, watching the man I was beginning to love prepare to deny me once again. The seesaw had hit the ground, and as the door began to glow with the heat of an incoming blast, I realized that the price of my survival was going to be the total destruction of whatever was left of his soul. The door didn't explode. It dissolved. A silent, shimmering wave of dark magic ate through the wood, leaving nothing but a gaping hole into the rainy corridor. 3 figures stepped through the threshold, their faces obscured by the shadows of deep, hooded cloaks. The air in my flat suddenly felt like ice, the atmospheric charms I'd spent years perfecting being stripped away by their very presence. "Director Malfoy," a voice purred. It was Hilliard. He lowered his hood, his eyes glinting with a sickening mixture of triumph and greed. "I must say, I didn't expect to find you in such modest surroundings. I thought you had better taste than a muggle-born's flat." Draco didn't move. He stood between me and the intruders, his wand held low but ready, his back a rigid line of defiance. "I was conducting an unscheduled inspection, Hilliard. It seems Granger's incompetence extends to her security protocols. I found her in possession of documents she had no right to see." He held up the ledger. The black leather shimmered in the dim light. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by a giant's fist. He was doing it. He was handing over the evidence, the only thing that could save us, just to maintain his cover. "Is that so?" Hilliard stepped further into the room, his gaze flicking to me. I stood frozen by the bookshelf, my wand in my hand, but my arm feeling like lead. I had to play the part. I had to be the victim. And what does the Golden Girl have to say for herself? It looks to me like she's been caught in an act of sedition. "She's a fool," Draco spat, his voice sounding so much like the boy I had hated at school that it made my stomach turn. "She thinks she's still playing hero. She thought this book would be her ticket back to the minister's inner circle. She didn't realize it was her death warrant." "Then why is she still breathing, Draco?" The second figure stepped forward, removing his hood to reveal Travers. His face was a mask of cold, pure-blood arrogance. "If you found her with this, the protocol is clear. We cannot have witnesses to the department's internal adjustments." The tension in the room reached a breaking point. The silence was so heavy I could hear the rain dripping from Hilliard's cloak onto my rug. I looked at the back of Draco's head, praying for a sign, a twitch, anything to tell me this wasn't the end. "She's more useful alive for now," Draco said, his voice as smooth as silk. "If she disappears tonight, the minister will start asking questions I don't want to answer. If we keep her under supervision in the department, we can control the narrative. She can be the scapegoat for the embezzlement once we've finished the audit." Hilliard looked at the ledger, then back at Draco. He seemed to be weighing the options. "You've always been a clever snake, Malfoy, but I think you're getting soft. You've spent too much time in her shadow." He raised his wand toward me. "Crucio. Expelliarmus!" The spell didn't come from me. It came from Draco. In a blur of motion, he didn't just disarm Hilliard. He sent a concussive blast into the center of the group that threw all 3 men back into the hallway. The sudden shift from cold calculation to violent protection was so fast it left me gasping. "Run!" Draco roared, turning to grab my arm. He didn't lead me to the door. He dragged me toward the window. "The wards are down, but they've blocked the flue. You have to jump. There's a cushioning charm on the alley floor. I set it an hour ago." "What about you?" I shouted over the sound of Hilliard's group scrambling to their feet. "I'm the one they want. If I stay, I can hold them off long enough for you to get to the safe house." He shoved the ledger back into my hands. "Take it. This is the original. The one I showed them was a duplicate I made while you were pouring the wine. Go, Hermione. Now!" "No! I won't leave you!" I grabbed his lapels, pulling him close. The warmth was back, but it was frantic, desperate, and laced with the scent of ozone and impending blood. "You can't keep doing this alone. If you stay, they'll kill you." "They won't kill a Malfoy without a trial," he lied, and I knew it was a lie the moment it left his lips. He looked at me, and for one heartbeat, the mask was gone entirely. He looked like he wanted to say 1,000 things, but instead, he reached out and touched my cheek, his fingers trembling. "You are the only good thing I've ever done. Don't let them take that away." He pushed me. I fell backward into the cold night air, the wind rushing past my ears. I saw his silhouette against the light of my flat, a solitary, dark figure facing 3 wands. Then I hit the cushioning charm in the alleyway with a dull thud. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked up at the window, expecting to see flashes of light, to hear the sounds of a duel. But there was only silence, a terrifying, absolute silence. I stood in the rain, clutching the ledger to my chest. Every instinct I had told me to go back up there, to fight by his side, to be the Gryffindor he expected me to be. But I remembered the look in his eyes, the raw, bleeding honesty of a man who had sacrificed his soul to keep mine intact. If I went back, I was wasting his gift. I turned and ran. I ran through the winding alleys of London, my boots splashing in puddles, my heart a frantic, aching mess. I didn't go to the safe house. I went to the one place where they couldn't touch me, the home of the one person who still had enough power to stop this. By the time I reached the Ministry's secret entrance in Whitehall, I was shivering and soaked to the bone. I bypassed the main elevators and took the service stairs, my mind playing back every look, every insult, and every hidden annotation Draco had ever given me. He had been protecting me from the start. Not because he thought I was weak, but because he knew the world was cruel. He had allowed me to hate him so that I wouldn't have to fear the real monsters. I burst into the minister's private study, ignoring the startled cries of his guards. Kingsley Shacklebolt sat behind his desk, his brow furrowed as he looked up from a stack of scrolls. "Hermione, what is the meaning of—" "Read this," I gasped, slamming the ledger onto his desk. "Read it now. Hilliard and Travers. They're building a private army. They've been using the Greyback case as a front, and they have Draco Malfoy." Kingsley's eyes widened as he scanned the first few pages. This is treason. Where did you get this?" "Draco," I said, my voice breaking. "He's been acting as a double agent for months. He took the blame. He took the insults. He destroyed my reputation, all to keep the focus on him while he gathered this evidence. He's at my flat. They're going to kill him, Kingsley. Please." The minister didn't hesitate. He stood up, his deep voice barking orders to the auras who had rushed into the room. Coordinate with the strike team. Target Granger's residence. Use lethal force if necessary to secure Director Malfoy. I sank into a chair, my strength finally failing me. The emotional seesaw was still swinging, but now it was stuck on a terrifying, agonizing doubt. Was I too late? Had his final act of protection been his last? I sat in the silence of the minister's office, watching the rain lash against the window. The cold of the room felt like a precursor to a world without him. I realized then that I didn't care about the promotion, the reports, or the rights of sentient beings. Not if the price was the man who had stayed in the shadows so I could live in the light. An hour passed, then 2. Every minute felt like a year. I watched the door, waiting for a messenger, a Patronus, anything. Finally, the door opened. Kingsley walked in, his expression unreadable. "We have them," he said softly. "Hilliard and Travers are in custody. Their security force has been dismantled." "And Draco," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Kingsley stepped aside. Behind him, 2 auras were supporting a slumped figure. Draco's robes were shredded, his face covered in blood and soot. He looked like he had been through a war. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. I rushed to him, my hands shaking as I reached for him. The auras eased him into a chair. He groaned, his head lolling back. "Draco," I sobbed, kneeling at his feet. "Draco, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open. They were cloudy, filled with pain, but as they focused on me, a faint ghost of a smirk appeared on his bloodied lips. "Granger," he rasped, his voice a broken thread. You didn't go to the safe house. You always have to have the last word." "Shut up," I said, tears streaming down my face. "Just shut up and breathe." I took his hand. It was cold, so cold. But as I pressed it to my cheek, I felt his fingers twitch, trying to hold on to me. The trust was no longer a question. It was a bridge we had built out of ruins. But as the healers rushed in to take him away, I saw the look of utter, hollow exhaustion in his eyes. He had saved me. He had won. But as I watched them carry him out, I realized the war for his soul was far from over. He had spent so long being the villain that he didn't know how to be the hero, and I didn't know if I could teach him. The chapter ended with the smell of blood and rain, and the realization that the man I had hated was the only one who had ever truly loved me enough to let me hate him. The recovery ward at St. Mungo's was a place of sterile white light and the sickly sweet scent of essence of dittany. It felt far removed from the dark, rain-slicked corridors of the ministry, yet the silence here was even more oppressive. For 3 days, I sat in the hard wooden chair beside Draco's bed, watching the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of his chest. He was pale, too pale even for a Malfoy, and the dark bruising around his throat from Hilliard's suffocating curse served as a grim necklace. He hadn't woken up. The healers said it was a magical coma, a self-imposed withdrawal caused by the sheer exhaustion of holding back 3 high-level wizards, while his own magical core was depleted. They called it sorcerer's fatigue. I called it the price of being my shield. On the 4th morning, the sun broke through the London fog, casting a sharp golden spear of light across his face. His eyelids flickered. I froze, my hand hovering over his, afraid that even a touch might shatter the fragile moment. "Granger!" His voice was a dry rattle, barely a whisper. He didn't open his eyes at first, but his hand moved on the sheets, searching for something. I didn't hesitate. I caught his fingers in mine, squeezing them tightly. "I'm here, Draco. I'm right here." He opened his eyes slowly, wincing at the brightness. He looked at our joined hands, then up at me. The mask wasn't there. There was no arrogance, no coldness, just a raw, naked confusion that broke my heart. "The ledger," he managed to say, his throat clicking with the effort. "Kingsley has it. Hilliard and Travers are in the high-security wing of Azkaban. The purifier cells have been exposed. It's over, Draco. You did it." He closed his eyes again, a long, shuddering breath escaping his lips. "It's never over," he whispered. "The names. There were names in the shadows I couldn't get to. They'll just find new figureheads." "Not today," I said firmly, leaning closer. I used a damp cloth to wipe a bead of sweat from his forehead, my touch lingering on his skin. "Today, you are the man who saved the Ministry. The Prophet is calling you a hidden guardian. They've seen the reports I wrote, the real ones. They know what you did." At this, his eyes snapped open, a flash of the old, sharp silver returning. "You wrote reports? Hermione, I told you to stay out of the light. I told you to be the victim. And I told you I don't follow orders well," I countered, the emotional seesaw tilting back toward our usual friction, but this time it was laced with a desperate warmth. "I won't let you be the villain anymore. Not in the history books, and not in your own head." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "You've made me a target again. You've put me back on a pedestal I never wanted. I was safe in the gutter, Granger. People expect things from heroes. They expect them to be good." "You are good," I said, my voice thick with conviction. "No," he snapped, turning his head back to me, his gaze fierce. "I am a man who lied to your face for months. I am a man who humiliated you in front of your peers and took pleasure in the precision of it because it was the only way I could feel powerful. I am broken, Hermione. I am a collection of jagged edges, and you are trying to wrap your hands around me. You'll only get cut." The repulsion was a defense mechanism. I knew that now. He was terrified of the warmth, terrified of what it meant to be seen without his armor. I didn't pull away. Instead, I stood up and sat on the edge of his bed, forcing him to acknowledge the proximity. "I've been cut by experts, Draco. I think I can handle a few jagged edges." The silence that followed was different from the one in my flat. It wasn't heavy with danger. It was heavy with the possibility of something new. He looked at me, his gaze dropping to my lips and then back to my eyes. The tension was an ache, a slow burn that had survived the rain and the duels and the betrayal. "Why?" he asked, his voice breaking. "After everything I said to you, why are you still here?" "Because you were willing to be hated to keep me alive," I whispered, leaning in until our noses were almost touching. "And because I realized that the only thing worse than you being my enemy was the thought of you being gone." I reached out, my thumb tracing the line of his bruised jaw. He leaned into the touch, a low groan escaping his throat. It was the first time he had allowed himself to be vulnerable without a threat looming over us. The approach was slow, agonizing, and entirely earned. "I can't be what you want," he breathed, his eyes fluttering shut. "Then just be what you are," I replied. I leaned down and kissed him. It wasn't the frantic, desperate kiss of the hallway, nor was it the necessary confirmation of the flat. It was slow and quiet, tasting of salt and the lingering bitterness of healing potions. It was a kiss that acknowledged the years of hate and the months of lies, transforming them into something solid. It was a promise that the cold was finally receding. When I pulled back, he looked stunned. His hand came up to touch his lips, as if he couldn't believe they were still there. "The minister wants to see you when you're stronger," I said, trying to regain some semblance of professional composure, though my heart was racing. "He wants to offer you a permanent position in the High Council." Draco let out a dry, cynical laugh. "A Malfoy on the High Council? He really has gone soft in his old age. He recognizes value when he sees it, and so do I." I stood up to get him some water, but he caught my wrist. His grip was light, but his eyes were intense. "Don't go. Not yet." "I'm not going anywhere, Draco." I stayed for the rest of the day and the next. We talked, not about politics or reports, but about the small things. He told me about the books he'd read in the manor during his house arrest. I told him about the parents I had to find and the memories I had to mend. We were two broken people trying to figure out how the pieces fit together. But the world outside St. Mungo's was still waiting. On the third day after he woke, a memo arrived from the ministry. It was formal, cold, and addressed to Director Malfoy. He read it in silence, his face turning back into a mask of granite. "What is it?" I asked, a sense of dread pooling in my stomach. "Hilliard has requested a public hearing," Draco said, his voice flat. "He claims that the ledger was forged. He claims that I was the one who initiated the purifier cells, and that I used you as a distraction to cover my tracks. He's calling for a full trial by the Wizengamot." The betrayal doubt flared in the back of my mind, a poisonous whisper. Could he have forged it? No. I had seen him face them. I had seen the blood. "He won't win," I said, though my voice lacked the certainty I wanted. "We have the evidence. We have my testimony." "It's his word against mine, Hermione. A war hero versus a marked Death Eater. Even with the ledger, they'll want to believe him. They'll want to believe that the bad person is the one to blame." He looked at me, a flicker of that old sacrificial light in his eyes. "If this goes to trial, your reputation will be dragged through the mud along with mine. They'll say you were coerced. They'll say you were my mistress, easily manipulated by a pureblood." "Let them say it," I snapped. "I don't care about my reputation." "I do," he roared, sitting up in bed, the effort causing him to wince. "I didn't do all of this just for you to lose everything now. If I go to the hearing and plead temporary insanity or coercion, if I take the fall, you stay clean. You become the one who brought down the corrupt director. You get your career back." The emotional seesaw hit its most violent peak. He was doing it again. He was trying to push me away to save me. He was willing to go to Azkaban, to let the world think he was a criminal, just so I could have a seat at the table. "You are a stubborn, arrogant, self-sacrificing idiot," I yelled, the tears finally overflowing. "I am not going to let you be the villain again. We fight this together, or we don't fight it at all." He stared at me, his chest heaving. The warmth and the cold clashed in the air between us until the warmth finally won. He reached out and pulled me toward him, burying his face in my shoulder. "I don't know how to do this, Hermione," he whispered into my hair. "I don't know how to be the person you see." "Then let me show you," I said. holding him as if I could keep the whole world away. The hearing was set for the following Monday. As I walked out of the ward that evening, I knew the battle wasn't just in the courtroom. It was a battle for the truth of who Draco Malfoy was. He was willing to be hated, but I was going to make sure he was finally, irrevocably understood. The chapter ended with a feeling of looming justice and the terrifying realization that in the wizarding world, the truth is often the most dangerous weapon of all. The ministry's courtroom was a cavernous amphitheater of cold black stone, lit by the ghostly blue flicker of hovering torches. The atmosphere was suffocating, heavy with the judgment of 100 Wizengamot members seated in tiered rows, their plum-coloured robes looking like spilled wine in the gloom. I stood at the witness lectern, my hands gripped so tightly on the wood that my knuckles were white. In the centre of the room sat Draco. He was in the iron chair, though the chains remained still, a small concession to his status as a ministry official. He looked restored, yet fragile. He wore a crisp white shirt and a dark tailored coat, his silver hair swept back from a face that had returned to its habitual mask of granite. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the High Inquisitor, his expression one of bored, aristocratic disdain, the ultimate lie he told the world to keep from breaking. Hilliard sat across from us, flanked by high-priced legal counsel. He looked smug. He had spent the morning painting a picture of a cunning Malfoy who had used a naive and emotionally compromised Hermione Granger to siphon funds for his own revival of the dark arts. "Miss Granger!" the Inquisitor's voice boomed, echoing off the high ceiling. "You claim that Director Malfoy's public hostility toward you was a facade. You claim he destroyed your work and insulted your heritage to protect you?" A wave of derisive whispers rippled through the gallery. I felt the heat rise in my face, but I didn't flinch. "I don't claim it," I said, my voice projecting with the strength of every spell I had ever cast. "I know it. I have provided the court with the annotated drafts of my reports, documents recovered from Mr. Malfoy's private safe. In his own hand, he corrected my legal vulnerabilities. He removed references that would have made me a target for the very people now sitting in the defendant's box. The annotations could have been forged to create an alibi," Hilliard's lawyer interjected. "By whom?" I challenged, turning to look the man in the eye. "By a man who was prepared to die in my flat while I escaped with the truth. Draco Malfoy didn't want this hearing. He didn't want this glory. He was perfectly content to let you all believe he was a villain, as long as the work got done and the innocent remained safe." I looked at Draco then. For the first time, he turned his head. Our eyes met, and in that split second, the courtroom vanished. I saw the fear he was hiding, the fear that I was wasting my life on a lost cause. I saw the guilt he felt for dragging me into his darkness. I gave him a small, imperceptible nod. "I am not leaving you behind." "The evidence is clear," I continued, turning back to the assembly. "The ledger identifies the accounts used by Hilliard and Travers. The magical signatures on the purifier contracts match theirs, not Mr. Malfoy's. You are being asked to choose between a man who chose to be hated to save his country and men who chose to be loved while they dismantled it." The deliberation took 4 hours. I waited in the small, damp hallway outside the courtroom, the silence ringing in my ears. I didn't go to the canteen. I didn't talk to the reporters. I stood by the window and watched the grey London sky, praying that for once the world would see the man instead of the mark. When we were called back, the air felt different. The torches seemed brighter, or perhaps the shadows were just retreating. Draco Lucius Malfoy, the High Inquisitor announced. On the charges of embezzlement and sedition, this court finds you not guilty. The gallery erupted. There were gasps, shouts of protest, and scattered applause from the few who had seen the truth. But I only watched Draco. He didn't move. He didn't celebrate. He simply closed his eyes, his shoulders dropping an inch as if a mountain had finally been lifted from his back. However, the Inquisitor added, silencing the room, the court acknowledges the unorthodox and deceptive methods used. Mr. Malfoy will be required to serve a year of supervised community service within the ministry, under the oversight of the Senior Advocate's Office. My heart leaped. Under my oversight. The session was dismissed. Hilliard and Travers were led away in magical shackles, their faces twisted in fury. Draco stood up slowly, smoothing his coat. He waited until the room had mostly emptied before he walked toward me. We met in the center of the pit, the very place where so many lives had been decided. The tension was still there, but the can't stand it had been replaced by a quiet, exhausted understanding. "You're a terrible witness, Granger," he murmured, though his eyes were shining. "Too much emotion, not enough clinical detachment." It worked, didn't it? I stepped into his space, my hand reaching out to brush his sleeve. "You're free, Draco." "I'm never free," he said, but he took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine in plain view of the remaining clerks. "I'm under your supervision, remember? I believe that means I have to do whatever you say for the next 12 months. "In that case," I said, a small smile playing on my lips, "I have a lot of marriage licenses from 1850 that need filing. And I believe the new owner of the Malfoy estate needs to learn how to host a dinner that doesn't involve pureblood politics." He let out a short, genuine laugh, the first one I had ever heard. It was a beautiful, jagged sound. "A dinner? With your friends? Potter will probably try to arrest me again before the appetizers are served." "I'll protect you," I whispered, echoing the words he had lived by for months. He pulled me closer, his forehead resting against mine. The warmth was a steady, radiating heat now, no longer a flickering candle in the wind. "You already have, Hermione. You already have." He didn't care who was watching. He leaned down and kissed me. Not a kiss of desperation or survival, but a kiss of arrival. It was firm, deliberate, and intense. The confirmation that the masks were gone and the truth had finally settled between us. It was the taste of a hard-won peace. We walked out of the courtroom together, our footsteps echoing in sync on the marble floors. As we reached the golden gates of the atrium, the sun was setting, casting a long amber glow over the fountain. The war hero and the redeemed villain, stepping into a world that wasn't perfect, but was finally theirs to shape. Draco paused at the exit, looking back at the ministry's shadowed halls one last time. He squeezed my hand, his grip a silent promise. "Was it worth it?" I asked softly, looking up at him. "The hate, the lies, being the villain in my story?" He looked down at me, his eyes clear and silver, reflecting the fading light. He reached out and tucked a strand of my hair behind my ear, his touch lingering with a newfound tenderness. "I would be hated by the whole world," he whispered, if it meant you stayed alive to see the sun. I leaned my head against his shoulder as we stepped out into the cool evening air. The emotional seesaw had finally come to rest. There would be more battles, more prejudices to break, and more shadows to navigate. But as the London streets began to glow with lamplight, I knew that the man walking beside me would never let me face the dark alone again. He had been willing to be the monster so I could remain the light. And now, as we disappeared into the crowd, the light was more than enough for both of us.
Thank you for listening to this story. It is a story about a very difficult choice. Draco Malfoy chose to be a villain, but he did it for a good reason. He wanted to save the woman he loved. Sometimes love is not about flowers or sweet words. Sometimes love is about protection, even if that protection looks like cruelty. Hermione is a strong woman. She learned a big lesson. She learned that people are not always who they seem to be. She saw the hurt behind the mask of an enemy. Draco was ready to be hated. He was ready to be alone. He only wanted Hermione to be safe. That is a very high price for love. I hope this story touched your heart. Life is not black and white. People are complex. Love can be found in the darkness shadows. Thank you for being with me. See you in the next story.